When the stagecoach rolled into Rattlesnake Crossing at sundown, every porch along the main street grew eyes. Strangers were always watched there. But a woman arriving alone was watched the way wolves watch a limping mare. She stepped down slow in a worn brown coat, one hand clutching a carpet bag, the other pressed low beneath the fabric, as if she meant to hold herself together by force. The men outside the saloon smirked. The boarding-house widow narrowed her eyes. The driver tossed her bag into the dirt and did not offer a hand, but Wade Mercer, standing outside the feed store with dust on his boots and grief carved into his face, saw what the others missed, the flash of pain when her feet touched ground, the fierce way she straightened after it, and the truth that came with it. She was carrying a child and hiding it from the whole town. Some secrets are louder than gunfire. Wade had spent 10 years training himself not to notice much. After spring fever took his wife Clara and their baby boy, he became the kind of rancher who worked before sunrise, ate in silence, and let the world pass him like weather. He owned a modest spread west of town and preferred the company of horses to people. But when the stranger glanced toward the boarding house with the look of someone measuring whether humiliation was worth a roof, something buried shifted in him. She made it 6 steps before another pain bent her slightly at the waist. Then she straightened fast. Proud enough to fight even her own body, Wade crossed the street. "That place will skin you alive if it smells desperation," he said. Nodding toward the boarding house, she looked at him with tired green eyes, sharp from fear. "Then I'll sleep in a stable," she said. "I got a spare room," Wade answered. "Warm stove, clean bed. No questions till morning." A laugh came from the saloon porch. Wade rested one hand near his holster, and the laugh died. The woman hesitated. Another cramp crossed her face, and that settled it. "Only till morning," she said. "Mercy often begins with words small enough to accept." The ride to his ranch was quiet except for wagon wheels. After a while she said, "Evelyn Hart." Wade nodded. "Wade Mercer." Then she added, lower, "I'm not married," as though the fact might turn the wagon around. Wade kept his eyes on the road. "Not my business tonight," he said, and some of the tightness left her face. His house was plain, timber walls, black stove, a table marked by years, and the silence of rooms that had forgotten laughter. He made beans and bread while she stood near the door like somebody waiting to be told she did not belong. When he showed her the back room, she studied the lit lamp, the quilt, the wash basin. "You live here alone," she said. Wade nodded then, before he meant to. "Used to be 3 of us." She looked at him and, mercifully, asked nothing that told him more than questions would have. Later, when she asked why he would help her, he stared into the stove fire and said, "Because once I needed the world to be kinder than it was, and it wasn't. Some answers come from graves." Before dawn, the storm arrived, rain hammering the roof, thunder shaking the windows. Wade was in the barn when he heard Evelyn cry out from the house. He ran back and found her bent over the bed frame, sweating, pale, breathing hard. The coat she had hidden behind thrown across a chair. There was no hiding her anymore. "How long?" he asked. "Since yesterday afternoon," she gasped. "I thought I had more time." Wade reached for his hat. "I'm fetching Doc Bennett." But she grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength, panic fiercer than labor in her eyes. "No, doctor, please, if people know where I am." "He'll find me between contractions," she told him enough. Silas Boone, freight owner from Abilene. Rich, polished, rotten underneath, he had promised marriage while she kept his books, then threatened ruin when she told him about the baby. Worse, she had seen his hidden ledgers, bribes, false manifests. Stolen rifles moved under honest freight. When she refused to stay silent, he called her unstable and sent men after her. From the bottom of her bag, she pulled wrapped pages, proof enough to bury him if the law ever looked honest for one afternoon. Wade tucked the papers into his coat and made his choice. "I know somebody better than Bennett," he said. "Martha Quinn, midwife. Mean as a fence post and twice as useful, truth gives cowards fear and decent men purpose." He rode through the storm and returned with Martha near dawn. The old woman took command at once, ordered water boiled and cloth torn. then shoved Wade out of the room while Evelyn labored behind the door. He paced the front room, listening to thunder and cries that dragged him 10 years backward to the morning Clara died. He remembered the doctor's sorry face, the stillness after all that pain, the feeling that the house itself had gone hollow around him. He gripped the back of a chair and forced himself not to drown in it. Not again, not in this house. Then the horses outside began pitching and snorting. Wade crossed to the window and saw 3 riders in the rain. Hats low, shoulders slick, too still to be neighbors. One rode up and pounded the door. Mercer. "We're looking for a woman." Wade took down his rifle and answered without opening. "Then ride on," the man laughed. "She belongs to Mr. Boone." From the back room came another cry, loud enough for the riders to hear. Silence held for 1 beat, then the voice turned mean. "Sounds like we found her." Wade pulled back the rifle hammer slow enough for them to hear it. "Step on my porch," he said, "and I start burying men. Some warnings are prayers in a harder language." The first shot blasted through the window. Glass rained across the floorboards. Wade dropped behind the table and fired once through the broken pane. Outside, a horse screamed and someone cursed. Another rider rushed the side porch, and Wade met him at the door, slamming it into his gun hand, then bringing the rifle butt across his face hard enough to drop him into the mud. The second fired from the yard and splintered the rail. Wade answered and caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The third turned smart and ran for the barn with a lantern, meaning to smoke them out or burn them alive. Wade ran into the storm after him, and they collided between the corral and the barn. Boots sinking in mud, fists landing close and brutal. The lantern flew and burst hissing in the rain. The man was younger and quicker, but Wade carried 10 years of buried grief in his shoulders, and grief is savage when finally given a target. He drove the rider backward into a fence post and kept hitting until the fight ran out of him and he slid limp into the mud. Some battles are won by skill, others by everything a man has survived before them. When Wade staggered back toward the porch, blood and rain mixing down his face, he heard a sound that stopped him cold. Not thunder now, not gunfire, but the thin, furious cry of a newborn child. He stood under the broken window as if struck through the heart. Then Martha opened the hall door with blood on her sleeves and victory in her eyes. "Girl," she said, small, loud, alive. Wade stepped into the room slowly. Evelyn lay exhausted against the pillows, face pale as candle wax, and in her arms was the tiniest angry scrap of life he had seen in years. Wrapped in a blanket, fists clenched against the world she had entered fighting, Evelyn lifted tear-filled eyes to him. "You stayed," she whispered. Wade could only nod. On the table beside the bed lay Boone's ledger pages, wet at the edges from the storm. Beside them lay proof that neither Boone nor fear had won. Every tyrant believes he writes the ending. Then life arrives and shames him. Morning came bright and washed clean, the prairie shining under pale gold light. Martha sent word to a marshal in Red Creek, a man outside Boone's pocket, and by noon, Silas Boone was in irons 2 counties over, with enough evidence in a saddlebag to sink him for good. The law had ignored frightened women before. Wade knew that. Evelyn knew it best of all. But numbers in a ledger gave the truth a spine where decency had none. By afternoon, the broken glass was swept up, and the ranch house no longer felt like a lonely place fighting ghosts. 2 days later, Evelyn sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt with the baby tucked against her breast. The fear in her face had softened into something that almost looked like rest. When Wade came up from the corral, she said, "I named her Clara. If that's all right." The old ache moved through him. "But gently this time, it's all right," he said. Then she asked the question that had been waiting since the storm. "What happens now?" Wade leaned on the porch rail and looked out over the pasture. Fences to mend, work to do, a house behind him no longer empty. "Now you stay till you're strong," he said. "After that, you stay if you want. There's work here, room 2. And while I'm breathing, no one touches you or that child on this land. Sometimes rescue is not a miracle. Sometimes it is simply being told you may remain." By the time the roads dried, Rattlesnake Crossing had changed its story. Because towns that feed on scandal are quick to bow before courage once it becomes public. Folks who had stared at Evelyn with hard judgment now tipped their hats when she rode in with little Clara bundled in her arms. Even the boarding-house widow sent over a pie. Though nobody believed remorse had improved her baking, Evelyn took over the ranch books. Wade fixed the broken porch rail. Martha visited often just to criticize everyone's common sense. And each evening lamplight filled the house that had once echoed with nothing but memory. One sunset, Evelyn stood beside Wade on the porch and asked softly, "When I stepped off that stage, how did you know?" Wade watched the sky go red over the pasture and answered without looking at her. "Because you were holding yourself like the world meant to steal something precious. And I knew that look." She leaned against his shoulder then. Quiet, careful, no promise bigger than the evening. Only trust, warmth, and a child sleeping safe behind them. Beyond the fence, the west was still wide and ruthless. But the house was lit, the door was open. And for two people who had nearly lost everything, that was more than enough. Because sometimes the bravest thing a cowboy can do is open his home. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is walk through the door and believe she deserves to stay.